Recently here at Tech Yes City, we did a build involving this CPU right here, the i9-9900T, where the purpose of that build was to get one of these CPUs, which admittedly it is pretty cheap for an i9 CPU, coming in at $215 shipped worldwide. And so I utilized that i9 branding to make something that really came together for a decent price point. If you haven't seen that build, I'll put the link up here. And to be honest, the feedback after that, it's some pretty good news. I pretty much listed that build and it lasted up for about 10 minutes before it instantly sold. Someone just snapped it up and I was just scratching my head like, wow, the power of these i9s, it can work if done right. So first things first with this CPU, if you're looking for something just for the name, then this is definitely going to have it. But the reason I didn't do this video sooner was because I feel like it's not the best value for money for gamers out there. And if you've recently seen my $20 Xeon, the X99 video we took a look at, put the link up here for that, they are coming in. Those X99 Xeons are the ones that are going to be for those people who are looking for pure price performance. Though this right here, let's look at what this exotic is all about, who it's going to benefit, and of course, how it performs against popular counterparts like the Ryzen 5 2600, Ryzen 5 3600, which come in a lot cheaper than this, and of course, its big brother, the 9900KS, which clocks all the way to 5 GHz all cores, and of course, uses a lot more power. Though, before we get into the video, one thing I will say with this CPU was I can't really find it anywhere for sale on retail shelves. That is the retail version. Intel have it listed on their website at currently plus 400 USD. So getting this thing for $215, even though it's an engineering sample, did surprise me quite a bit. Though that being said, you're probably wondering, are these engineering samples going to affect the final outcome of these chips? And I don't have a retail sample to compare it to, but I've tried it against 3 different motherboards around here at the Tech Yes studio, and it's all worked first go. As soon as I've popped it in to these motherboards, they've worked absolutely fine, whether they're an 8 series or a 9 series motherboard. And the funny thing about these engineering samples right here was that they were manufactured back in early 2018. And this one right here, it also supports 3600 megahertz XMP profile on memory out of the box, which I was curious to test. So basically what I'm trying to say is though, this thing works and it works quite well. Even though it has a base clock of 1.7 gigahertz, I found in all my testing here, it clocked up to 3.3 gigahertz in games. Then in stress tests, it went down to 3.2 gigahertz. And the single core boosts allow this CPU to turbo all the way up to 3.8 gigahertz. So that 1.7 gigahertz printed on the CPU, that's nothing to sweat about when it comes to real world operations. Though one thing I did run into that was something to be a little bit worried about was if you're trying to manually tune this CPU in terms of its CPU ratio as well as its cache ratio, then I'd recommend just leaving them on default and only locking in your XMP profiles. Because when I tried to play around with the CPU manually, it actually did downclock the CPU to 1.7 gigahertz all core, and this was both on an H310 motherboard and an ASRock Z390. Anyway, let the benchmark numbers roll, and then we'll get on with a conclusion with the 9900T. So starting off these numbers, this time around we are using an RTX 2080 Ti and we were using 3200 MHz CL14 timings. Though one thing I will say with the Ryzen 5 2600 in today's comparison was it was a retail sample I recently got off the shelves and the memory only went up to 3066 MHz. That's the best I could get this CPU to. So the numbers may be a little bit lower than what you're used to, but for what it's worth, it's still gonna be running fine with its all core out of the boost, which went to around 3.75 gigahertz all core. Anyway, rolling those numbers, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. You guys asked me to test out a few different titles on Ubisoft that stress single core performance more than it does multi-core. So I've included a few of those, this being the first, and we can see here that the Ryzen 5 3600 is doing the best in terms of price performance. The 9900T isn't doing that bad at all, and the 9900KS coming out on top. So this is on high settings as well, 1080p. Then we move over to Far Cry New Dawn. And we've got here a scenario where the 2600 is coming close to the 9900T. So this is raw single core boost in this game, and we see the 9900T is basically trading blows with the 2600, 3600 is coming out on top, And then the 9900KS getting a massive gain over the 9900T. So even though the single core boost can go up as high as 3.8 gigahertz, unfortunately when you get slight loads, which is what Far Cry New Dawn does on other cores, it will drop it down to 3.3 gigahertz, which is what we saw in this game and why the 9900T didn't do as well as I guess it could have done in some of the other titles here. But now moving over to Fortnite showed the 9900T came in with the L here, scoring 248 average FPS versus 252 on the 2600, then the 3600 getting a sizable boost over that, then the 9900KS coming out on top. Though, when we look at those numbers for what they're worth, I'd say it's not really a loss for any of these CPUs since they can all play on 240 Hz monitors absolutely fine, which I'm guessing a lot of competitive players will want to do. And even then, we're testing out on high settings, so we could drop these to low settings and get even better numbers. However, Shadow of the Tomb Raider showed the 9900T scoring in with a very similar number to the 3600, despite the 3600 having less cores and less threads. And we know this game does like to utilize all those cores and threads available, as witnessed with some other benchmarks on higher core count model CPUs. So the 2600, this was the worst result for this CPU out of all the games I tested here today, scoring significantly lower than both the 9900T and the 3600 in this benchmark. However, Escape from Tarkov showed that the 3600 was right up there with the 9900KS, basically trying to break through that cap limit of 120 FPS and scoring 121 average. The 9900T coming in with 112, and then that was beating the Ryzen 5 2600. Then the last title we've got up here is F1 2019, high settings, and what was kind of like starting to make me scratch my head was I did check the FPS limit in this game and it does have 250. So I'm quite surprised that the 9900KS is getting 259 average FPS. The first time I've actually seen this happen in a game. Though for what it's worth, all the other CPUs scored some really solid numbers in this game, nothing to sweat about. And finally moving on to the Cinebench R20 numbers and then followed by the power consumption numbers, we can see here that the 3600, in my opinion, did the best out of these numbers, getting a really solid single core and multi-threaded performance number, especially for its price. And then the 9900T did do pretty well, but it was still falling behind that of the 3600 in both multi and single. The 2600 was falling behind the 9900T, but that's got 2 less cores, 4 less threads, just like the 3600. And so I guess its score is decent on the 9900T. If you want to use this as a workstation or for video editing, this is a pretty good number to get a realistic idea on how this CPU will perform, especially coupled in with this next slide here, the power consumption numbers, which is, I feel, the biggest benefit of this CPU, this engineering sample that we've got in today's video. Scoring just over 50 watts on a full stress test, it really shows you where Intel's sweet spot is on 14 nanometer, despite them taking their CPUs all the way to 5 gigahertz. The 9900T did impressively well with its power consumption results. And if anything, coupled with the i9 name on this CPU, these are the 2 reasons I like this CPU, but I don't love it. And basically, if you're going to go for a mini ITX solution, or you really want to get that i9 branding and pretty much cheap out on a motherboard, get a budget CPU cooler, then the 9900T with that low power consumption figures that you just saw will enable you to do that. So basically now, recommendations for the 9900T. If you're a desktop enthusiast and you want to go this route, I would argue that the Ryzen 5 3600 is going to be a better purchase, both in terms of the motherboard upgrade path, as well as the CPU's raw performance, both in games and in productivity. I'd say the 9900T, however, of course, does have that benefit of going pretty well in a mini ITX rig, as we said before, or of course, if you want to pop this CPU in a gaming PC and then maximize the bling on that ad. And the last thing I'm going to say about this CPU is I haven't been too crazy about it, mainly because I knew the X99 Xeons, which I'm covering heavily this month. I know they're a better buy for a lot of you guys out there who are looking for that pure price performance sweet spot. Though of course, this does have its merits. It's just not up there, I feel, for people who want to get the most for their money, especially when you can get those X99 boards with cheap memory, couple it in quad channel, whereas this only has dual channel, and you can get the CPUs much cheaper they're going to be a price performance champion. So I've still got to cover the 8-core, which I'll be comparing to this in an upcoming comparison, as well as the 12-core. So do stay tuned for those videos. Though of course, do let us know in the comments section below what you think about this $215 engineering sample from AliExpress. Love reading your comments as always. And speaking of a comment which turns into the question of the day, we've got this from Nicholas Vidal, and they ask, does this method work with the Xeon E5 2689X79? They're referring to our V3 full unlock tutorial, which you will need to do in order to extract the most out of the X99 Xeons that I'm covering here on the channel. So basically this tutorial only applies to those Haswell X99 Xeons, the V3 specifically. The 2689 is actually what would be considered a V1, so it's a different generation which didn't carry this exploit, unfortunately. So you're pretty much left with what speeds this CPU will perform with out of the box. Though that being said, you may be able to get a little bit more extra performance if your motherboard supports a B clock or host clock overclocking, where you can take that from 100 megahertz to say 103 megahertz and extract a little bit more performance out of that CPU. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this video or it's helped you out, and if it has done either of the two, I'd appreciate you hitting that like button for us. And with that aside, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon, so stay tuned for the 8-core Xeon, which we'll be featuring very shortly. Peace out for now. Bye.